So in this video, I'm going to show you how to simplify a very complex scene. Hi, welcome to Paint Coach. I'm Chris Fornatero, here to help simplify oil painting so you can get better faster. So a lot of people would take a look at this photo and see these cliffs and these cracks and these edges and just be very intimidated. How am I going to paint all this detail? And they just get lost. They start painting, they just get very lost in all the details and all the minutia of this image. So I'm going to show you how I simplify a complex subject like these cliff walls. I'm going to show you how I start out very simple and build up to detail. And then by the end, I think you'll be surprised at how little detail you actually need to translate what you want. Now, before we get into that, if you want to see the actual full real-time version of this painting video tutorial along with a bunch of other painting tutorials, you can find that on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below. Also, when you become a patron, you get access to my private Facebook group where you can post your paintings, comment on others, give advice from other people. I comment there and post in there as well. It's just a great positive painting community, and you can get access to that by signing up for my Patreon. All right, so let's just start with my colors here. I got a very limited palette today. I have ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, cadmium red, cadmium lemon, and titanium white. I'm actually not using any medium in this, just straight paint thinner and oil paint. And I'm working on a 9x12 acrylic primed linen panel. Now the first thing I want to do is put a wash all over this panel and get rid of this plain white. I want a very neutral value to start out with. That way I can gauge my values correctly. If I leave it straight white, anything that I put on there is going to look really dark next to straight white. So I'm going to get my burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and some paint thinner and put a wash on it, wipe it down with my towel, and now I'm ready to paint. Now let me talk a little bit about brushes here. I'm going to be using a lot of Ivory synthetic flat brushes. I like the Ivory synthetic flat brushes from Rosemary & Co. No, they're not a sponsor. I don't get any money from them. If you want to see a video on the brushes I recommend for beginners, I made a whole video on a nice brush set that you can get from Rosemary & Co. I'll put a link to that above right here. But I like their brushes. They're thick, they're strong, they're sturdy, they keep their shape. And these specific flat brushes are great for painting rocks. They got that straight edge, and that's going to come in handy a lot in this painting for painting these straight, jagged edges of rocks. So I'm going to use a small brush. I'm going to draw my composition. It's very simple. I'm just getting the big general shapes here. And I'm using that same burnt sienna, ultramarine blue mixture with paint thinner to draw it in. All right, now it's time to block in the major shapes and values, and you want to be thinking big here. That's why I'm going to be using my big old number 14 ivory flat brush. This is a giant brush for such a little canvas panel, but that's what I want. I want to keep things simple here. I want to keep the paint thin. I just want to be thinking in very broad terms. I'm just going to find the average color that's not the darkest dark or the lightest light. It's what I see when I squint my eyes. I cannot tell you how important it is to squint your eyes, especially at the beginning of the painting. Squint your eyes, look at your subject, and paint what you see. It's a lot harder than it sounds. It takes a lot of discipline to just group things together, group values together, group colors together, and see things very simply. So I'm going to start with these cliffs here in the foreground. And since they're in the foreground, they're going to be a lot warmer and a lot more saturated than these cliffs that are behind it. So I'm mixing up a warm reddish brown color. And again, I'm kind of finding an average color and value here. It's not my darkest dark that I see. It's not the lightest light that I see. And if you struggle to find this value in color, always try and err on the side of making it too dark opposed to too light. It's always easier to work dark to light than light to dark. At least that's what I think. So these cliffs are going to be warmer, a lot more reds and yellows going on. They're going to be a lot more saturated. This is what's going to help establish the atmospheric perspective and help make these two sets of cliff walls separate from each other. We want to make sure they're looking like they're sitting at different distances. All right, so these cliffs in the distance, I want to seem like they're sitting further back, and with atmospheric perspective, as things get further away from you, certain colors are going to drop out. The first color is yellow, and then reds, and then you're left with blues. So I'm going to take the same color that I had for these cliffs in the foreground, and I'm going to add a little more blue and a little more red and a little more white to it. I need it to be lighter and cooler than these cliffs that I put in. And again, I'm using thin paint. I'm just finding an average. I'm just blocking it in very loosely. And as this canyon wall kind of bends back to the left, it gets further away from us. So in this back left-hand corner, it's actually going to get pretty blue. The red's going to drop out of my paint mixture here. I'm going to be left with pretty much just straight blue and white. Again, this is going to help create the illusion that this cliff wall isn't just a flat wall, it's actually curving back and going further back into space. See, setting up these basic values of atmospheric perspective for these big shapes is going to help you so much as you go forward, because as you add detail, you're going to know the value range and kind of the color that you need to be operating in for it to work in the end. Remember, in order not to get lost, work big to small. All right, now that I'm doing the grass at the base of these cliffs in the foreground, I'm going to make sure that I desaturate that green with some red, because red is green's complement. If I don't do that, that green's going to come out very artificial looking, very candy color green, and I don't want that. I want it to look like a natural earth grass green. And I'm keeping it relatively dark because this area of grass is in the shadows. Now I'm going to take that green that I have for the grass, I'm going to muddy it up actually with a little bit of the color that's in my cliffs here. I'm going to muddy it up and drop that down into the water as a reflection. Now I'll work on these reflections a little more. I'm just putting something in there as a kind of a placeholder to help me develop the rest of the painting as I go. I'm going to do the same thing with the color of the cliffs and just drop that color into the water using long vertical brush strokes to help indicate that reflection water look. All right, so I've worked around the whole painting and every part of it is kind of at this same base level. Now I want to go in and identify my darkest darks. There's not too many of them. It's just going to be these small cracks in the wall here in the foreground, maybe a little bit on the shoreline and the grasses here. All right, so I've worked back to where I've started with these cliffs in the foreground, and now I want to dial in their exact color and their exact value a little more. So I'm going to mix up some paint. It's going to be a little bit lighter. I'm going to use my flat brush with my straight edge to develop these rocks a little more. Now I'm not going to completely get rid of the darker color that I'm painting over. I'm going to leave that in certain sections, which is going to help indicate different layers and different cracks and stuff and details in the rock. Now in order to paint over the paint that you've laid down, you're going to need your paint to be a little bit thicker. How thicker? Just thick enough that it can go over. This might take a practice brush stroke or two. You don't want to go too thick too fast, but you do need it thicker to go over this other paint. So mix up some paint, try a brush stroke. If it's not going over it, if it's just mixing into it, you need to go a little bit thicker. So go a little bit thicker, try again until you get it to the right thickness level. Eventually, with enough practice, you'll be able to do this very quickly and you'll be able to get it right away. Now again, I don't want to develop one area too much, so I'm going to move from these rocks in the foreground to the rocks in the background. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the darkest darks in these cracks back here, but since it's further away, these darkest darks are going to read very blue. So I'm just mixing up my ultramarine blue and a little bit of white for these cracks in the wall. And I'm not painting every single crack. You know, I'm squinting my eyes still a little bit and just doing the major cracks that I see. You know, you don't need to get in there and do every one. I mean, you can if you want to, but I feel like a lot of people get lost that way. You know, you just need to suggest it. Just find the major key important ones. Okay, so I've been working with a lot of darks now and I really want to bounce back with some light. So I'm going to mix up a light value for these highlights in the cliffs in the background. Now this highlight color is not going to be as warm as when I put it in the cliffs in the foreground. So I'm going to make sure that I make it a little bit cooler, maybe throw a touch bit of my ultramarine blue in there, a little touch of yellow, a little touch of red. I'm going to be kind of using all the colors here, but it's going to be almost like an off-white. It's not going to be very warm. It's going to be a pretty neutral off-white color. And again, I'm not putting this everywhere I see it. I'm identifying the major highlight shapes that I need to translate what I want. So I'm putting down a brush stroke, stepping back, kind of seeing the whole composition, seeing where I want to put one, and being very deliberate at where I put these highlights. If you go and try and put every single one in the exact right place, it's going to get frustrating, you're going to get lost, and you're going to give up. And we don't want that. Now to help suggest a little more detail in these cliffs in the background, I'm going to mix up a lighter color similar to what I did to the cliffs in the foreground. And I'm just going to put it in certain areas, not completely getting rid of the color that was down there before. But again, using my flat brush with its straight edge to make certain marks is going to go a long way in suggesting detail without getting in there with a very small little brush and trying to paint out every single little crack and crevice that you see. As I build this grass in the foreground, I want to have more lighter values in it, but I want to make sure that I don't paint it too light that it doesn't look like it's in the shadow. All this grass is in the shadow here, so we got to make sure that it stays that way. And keeping it in that dark shadow zone is going to help for this grass in the background that actually is in the light, because we want that grass to seem very bright. So compared to our grass that's darker in the foreground, this grass is going to seem really bright. So I'm going to mix up a little more white into it, a little more yellow. It's also going to be a little more desaturated. It's not going to be as vibrant, not going to have as many yellows and reds in this grass grass in the background because, again, we want it to sit further in the back. I can't stress enough how important it is to dial in the correct values to nail this atmospheric perspective. If you do this, you really don't need much detail. And I feel like you'll be really happy with how your paintings turn out. Your paintings will have a lot of punch to them. They'll be very strong paintings. I don't know about you, but my favorite paintings are the ones that say and show so much with such little detail. All right, now that I've developed a lot of what's going on the land, I need to drop those colors down into the water for the reflections. Now, you don't need to go up there and find every single little color and drop it down. Just the major ones, find it up there, try and drop it straight down into the water using vertical strokes. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. You don't need every single color down there in your water. If you get the major key ones, you use those vertical brush strokes, it's gonna look great. All right, now it's time for our focal point, which is this raft with a few little people in it. And I wanna make sure that this has the most contrast out of anything in the painting, meaning the darks are going to be the darkest darks and the lights are going to be the lightest lights. This is going to help sell it as the focal point and draw people's eye to it. All right, there you go. Now, even though that this is a very simply painted painting, you can still use this process to reach a painting that has a lot more detail in it. You know, I can keep going back in and more layers, building up the detail as I go, using a smaller and smaller brush. It's up to you how much detail you want to put in it. Also, now, if your paint is getting too thick and you're just having trouble painting over top of it and getting detail, set the painting aside for a day or two. The paint will tack up. It won't be completely dry to the touch. You don't really want that, but it'll be sticky the next day or two, and you'll be able to paint over top of it a lot easier. So if you're struggling with it, try that. That might help. Again, if you want the full version of this painting video tutorial, you can find that along with a whole bunch of other painting video tutorials on my Patreon page, where you can also become a member of my private Facebook group and share your paintings with me, share them with everybody, comment, give advice, all that good stuff. If you want to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting. Whoa, you're still here. You made it to the end of the video. That must mean you really like it. In that case, you should hit the subscribe button. You'd also probably like this video too. And this video. Please pick one. All right, this is getting awkward.